Go ahead and get started if you guys don't mind. Yeah, so there's Tim Tams on the back table. That's like a nice Australian snack. You guys should take them. I recommend the caramel ones. But yeah, so before we get started, we just wanted to thank Janelle, Kathy, and Susan for organizing this trip. It was an incredible experience. We spent the about 4 weeks in Australia. We hit up 5 different cities, but before we dive into that, we're going to just go through and introduce ourselves. So my name's Megan Simpson, and I'm a junior in Phase 1 of the special education program.
I'm Betsy Oroni. I'm a Phase 1 in the special education program as well.
My name is Nicole Pinnella, and I am a Phase 3 in the special education program.
I'm Colleen Ross. I'm a junior studying elementary education.
And I'm Lindsay Duffy, and I'm also studying elementary education, and I'm a junior as well.
Yeah, so basically the program was set up. We went to 5 different cities. So as we go through the PowerPoint, we're going to start with kind of hopping around from city to city in the order we went to. Then we're going to kind of go into, in our last city at Canberra, we each got to go to an individual school for 2 days. And we're going to talk about our individual experiences, then kind of the differences that we noticed in the education system in Australia versus the States. And then we're going to kind of wrap it up with our Photo Voice project, which was the SPED 199's like final project. So before we even got to go abroad, we did start off with having classes, like it was an 8-week course, I believe, right? At the end of second semester, and we would meet a few times and kind of just go over like culture stuff, get to know each other, and those were run by Janelle. So I think we're ready to start with our first city.
Okay. So the first city that we went to was Brisbane. So we landed in the Brisbane airport after a very short 14-hour flight overnight. Some of us got sleep, some of us did not. But after we after we stepped off the plane, that's kind of that first like culture shock I think that I at least had. Was we got off the plane, we made it through customs finally, we were all super tired, and we go to get on the bus. And the first person and I, we walked to the wrong side of the bus because they drive on the other side of the road there. So it's one of those things that you don't think about when you're going to another place. And it kind of is similar to how our students might be in the school, is that like they don't always know all the rules and all the norms of a school that they're walking into. So just like us, they might try to do something that they don't even realize might not be the right way of doing things. So we might have to explicitly teach some of our students those things, where the bus driver had to tell us, girls, like, you're on the wrong side. So that's kind of how we started our trip off, was that initial kind of culture shock there. I know one of the other people we were just talking about, the elevators or the escalators. Yeah. The escalators are also on the other side. So on every airport we went to, everything like that, you're going and then you're like, whoop, wrong. I'm turning the wrong way here. So all those little things kind of start to add up over time. And then the next thing that we did, we went to some of the schools in Brisbane, which was really, really cool to be able to meet some of the kids from Australia and talk with them. We rotated through some classrooms, but my favorite was the first classroom I went into was a 4th grade class, and they were so curious to talk to us. And that kind of just went to show like kids are going to be kids no matter where you are. They were so interested in talking about like animals, the animals in America. They kept asking us what was there. We wanted to know about kangaroos, and just to show how different it was, the 4th grade I was talking to was like, oh yeah, kangaroos, like they're on the side of the road if cars hit them. I was like, oh, like not how we picture kangaroos. And they were like super interested in squirrels. They thought they were so cool. And we were like, they're just like, yeah, they just run around. So it was just very different perspectives, but also like 4th graders here love talking about animals too.
And yeah, going off about also with the kids will be kids stuff, every kid we talked to assumed we knew every celebrity. So we walked in and they're like, oh, so you have dinner with President Obama like weekly? And we're like, no, like, I don't know how important you think I am, but no. But they just assumed, like, just hearing how, like, because we came in with all these stereotypes about Australia, like, everything's gonna eat me. And when we walked into the classrooms, yeah, like spiders and snakes, when we walk into their classroom, they kind of had all these stereotypes about America. And I know one of the kids like had come up to me and was like, I just want to let you know, like, we do have Starbucks here. And I was like, I think I'll be okay, but thank you. But another thing I did pull out, like, I just happened to have my coat on and I had a bunch of coins in my pocket, and I like just put them on the desk for the kids to play with, and they were going like crazy, like so like like touching them and being like, what is this one worth? What's this worth? And I mean, I'm double the kids' ages, and I did the exact same thing when my parents came back and switched my money to Australia. And I'm like, what's this? And they're like, I don't know. But it's just cool to see that, like, regardless of your age, like when you're introduced to something, you're gonna have the same reactions, which I think we'll notice in the classrooms as well. Like when you introduce a new topic, regardless of age, you're still getting exciting reactions. The next thing we did kind of in Brisbane, which away from the schools, was we did get to go to a koala and kangaroo farm. You can see in the pictures, we had a lot of fun there. Basically, it was cool because we got to kind of be the students. The lady who did the program that we sat in was really engaging. She would come in and kind of introduce a new animal by, we would all be sitting at tables and she would have us do an activity and we'd like have to kind of guess what animal was coming, and that's definitely something I think we can all take away in engaging students. I'm not someone who can just sit in a lecture for all day, so stuff like this is really cool to take away and be able to like bring to my classroom. Like having just mini lessons before introducing something kind of gets the kids excited. Like the whole time I'm like, what animal's gonna come out? Like I'm so happy, like excited. But yeah, and then of course we got to play in like a giant field of kangaroos, which who can complain about? And as you can see, I had kangaroo food in my mouth to get them to kiss me, so questionable, but worth the pick.
So something we saw all throughout wherever we went was the Indigenous schooling and what that meant to the people. And in Townsville, we went to James Cook University, and we actually got taught like a lesson from in that top, what side is that? The corner picture was Uncle Rusty, and he taught us how to throw boomerangs properly and how to throw a spear. So I think most of us tried doing that. And it's cool because at that university, they offer that class for their students to take. And we thought it was interesting that how much they like their culture, their background, their ancestors, they like to learn about it, they keep it in their lives, and the way the university supported that for those students.
Another thing that really stood out in Townsville was our meeting with other future teachers. They were students from James Cook University studying elementary primary education. And so we just had a really nice dinner and chatted with them for a while about what their program is like comparing to what our program is like and what they're looking forward to as teachers and their struggles. And I think we found that if they had been students here, we would have been friends with them. Like they were really nice, engaging girls that, going back to kids are kids. And what? And they met a boy. But just that we're very similar people, even though we live across the globe. They're very similar personalities to us and had similar goals. So that was really fascinating.
Cairns was the next city we went to. In Australia, they don't pronounce the R, so it is pronounced Cairns, which is something that I think we struggled with for a while. We kept saying Carnes, and then people would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. So that was really cool. And on one of our first free days, we actually got to kind of separate and do whatever we wanted to. So we kind of, escaped from the professors for a day. And however you want to look at it. So we found this thing called Barefoot Tours, which actually I think our entire group ended up going on except a few people. And it was these two big buses that you could see there on the PowerPoint. And they just drove us around to different places. We swam in a crater of a volcano. We jumped off of waterfalls. We went swimming down creeks. It was a really, truly amazing experience. And because it wasn't an experience that was just planned for us, we got to meet people from Switzerland and Sweden and Canada and Brazil. And it was really a great experience to kind of just meet all these different people that are also experiencing new things just like we are. And at the end of that, I actually did meet, we had morning tea, like they do every day. They love their morning tea. And I was talking to a woman, and she said she was from Germany, and she was asking me for where I was from, and I said, oh, I'm study abroad. We're a bunch of teachers, and she said she was a teacher from Germany. So something really cool I got to do was kind of compare Australian teaching to US teaching to German teaching all in one day, which was really a great experience, I think, that I didn't even expect to have.
So another thing we did in Cairns was we went to the Great Barrier Reef. Sure you've heard of it. We snorkeled, and some of us scuba dove. I did not. You did. So something we did before we actually went out in the water was did this thing called Reef Teach, and it was this lady, maybe a man too, taught us about all the aquatic life before we actually jumped on in and saw it. So we learned about all the different types of coral, way more than you would ever think. They would pass around different corals, pass around horses, and it was a very engaging and it was a great pre-teaching thing because we don't go snorkeling often, so we didn't know like what it made such a difference, like going in and actually knowing what you were looking at. Like, oh, that was that type of coral. Don't remember now, but did then. Yeah, so that was really good, and it was something to like definitely be aware of, that it's nice to know things before you're just thrown into it.
And then we actually went snorkeling the next day. I was not brave enough to scuba dive. A few of them were. I was not. And that was my experience. Was my first time out on a boat that far and going out into that water. I'd never been snorkeling. The first time I was out there, I was panicking. I was like, this is not for me. I do not like this at all. They're like, oh, look, there's a sea turtle. I was like, I just want to be on the boat. Like, it was a lot to take in at once. They give you all this support and all this help and try to like really get you into the water. I had a floaty on, everything, and I still was like really, really nervous about it. So I went back to the boat that first time because I was just done after 20 minutes. The second time we went out, we actually had to jump off the boat. So that was an even bigger step to take. But then after that, they couldn't get me out of the water. I really, really liked it because it was that initial shock that we had to take away. And that's also kind of, again, how our students can be in the classroom. Like if you dump them into something, like they might not like it right away. It might be really scary no matter how much that you help them. So that was kind of me connecting to what we experienced there of like, that's how our students could feel in the classroom. And let me tell you, it was not a good experience the first time. But then after that, if you help them out and you kind of warm them up to it, it really can make a huge difference.
I'm just going to throw something in. I think on the opposite end of that, like Nicole was like scared, but like there were other people like Megan that was like diving down, like trying to get on that sea turtle. Like, like there was people at like two different like ends, like people just floating, people way up there, people way below. And I think that just shows like you don't know where everyone's going to be till you actually start.
So based on what my colleagues have said, like we all tried new things and got out of our comfort zones. And one thing kind of random that stuck out to me was trying cacao beans, it comes in this fruit-like substance. This was on the Barefoot tour. So basically the beans, the chocolate beans themselves, pre-chocolate beans, are about the size of a coffee bean, and they're very concentrated chocolatey flavor. But on the outside is like this citrusy fruit, very sour substance that you have to suck off to get to the sweet part. So that was just something that I was afraid to try, but I'm so glad I did, very similar to what they have said. Like, you appreciate the experience after you have it. It's something as small as trying a new food, but it was a cool experience too.
Okay, so in Sydney, picture of Sydney, it's very much like Chicago. That was the first thing I noticed. We stayed in a hostel, which is obviously more popular probably in there than Chicago. But we stayed in the very like center of Sydney, and it was very similar to Chicago. One of the things I noticed right away, though, was how safe I felt. I am from a Chicago suburb. I go to Chicago frequently, and I don't know, I'm kind of a scared person. I don't know, I'm not comfortable. I would never go on the L. But we traveled like all throughout Sydney. Like we went from like our hostel to the harbor, which is not close. Like we took a train, and like, I don't know, I felt so comfortable doing everything, getting on a train, getting on a bus. And I think that just shows like the differences. Like, I mean, you walk around Chicago, you see the crime, you see the poverty, you see, I don't know, you just notice different things. And then in Sydney, it was like they have Chinatown there, and Chinatown was awesome. I went there multiple times, and it's not scary. And I think that's just important because I think our environments are important, like where we are, and we want people to feel comfortable where they're coming from.
An experience that stuck out to me was one time we had some free time, and a couple of friends and I were walking down the street in Sydney, and we heard some chanting, and we started to see some signs. And so we were trying to figure out what was going on. There's a lot of people just standing on the sidewalks watching, and I thought, is it a parade? Is there a holiday? It turned out that it was a protest by Indigenous people, as well as people that don't have Indigenous roots, protesting for more Indigenous rights. So in many ways, it reflected what I've learned about in history class of 1950s, 1960s America with the civil rights movement. So it was interesting to sort of see their history in action. Like their students will learn about this years down the road as their minority people are fighting for more rights. And so it was cool to be a part of it by watching, but also part of the end of our trip in Sydney was hiking in the Blue Mountains. They're blue because primarily there's trees, the eucalyptus trees that give off like a blue, is it steam or blue mist? So they do sort of have a blue hue. And so I think that was a really good bonding experience for all of us, just hiking together, getting lost in the woods, and then also seeing the Three Sisters, which is a rock formation up in the top right. There's these three big rock formations that have a story behind them. The indigenous people believe that they were three sisters that were turned into stone. So just really interesting to hear more about the indigenous people's stories. And yeah.
So for the Blue Mountains, something I really took away from this was what our professors did for me. I have nerve damage in my knee, and when I found out I was going to Australia, the first thing I did was obviously like Google and make my own itinerary. And Blue Mountains was like at the top of the list. Like I was like, oh yeah, like I'm so excited to hike this. And then as the trip went on, like my knee like started to hurt like more and more, and I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do this. Like I was getting really nervous, but I didn't want I wanted to like just fit in with like my friends. Like they were all going, like I wanted to go. And I didn't want like it to look like I was like being babied. Like I don't know. I just didn't want it to like the teachers to make me feel like I was being like treated differently. And I think our teachers that went on the trip with us like just really made me feel like when they were asking about my knee and helping me with different accommodations and ideas, they did it in a very professional manner where I felt super into the group. And I think that's something like I definitely am going to take away when I'm working with my students. Like they're kids, they want to be with their friends. They don't like, regardless of the disability, that's a minor example of how I like could have felt and didn't because of how well they handled it. So that's definitely something I'm going to take away, because then I did get to hike it one way, and yeah, I had to take like the tram up or whatever, but like my pals went with me, like, so it was really fun, and I was able to do it, and it was awesome. And if you're ever in Australia, I'd recommend going.
And then, of course, our favorite part was the Professional Development Conference, Successful Learning from the University of Sydney. They had a conference, and our favorite keynote speaker, Janelle Benz, spoke, which was a really cool thing. And also, Jamie Pearson also got to talk at that conference, and I think both of them, seeing our own colleagues, classmates, friends speak at a conference in Australia was really, truly amazing. And we really learned a lot at that conference. I loved going to Professional Development Conference, where we got to like learn about education, not just from the American standpoint. We really learned about like things that people in Australia do. Although they're not terribly different, there are like minute things. There are some big things that they do that are different, and I love learning about education from an Australian standpoint, especially learning about it from my own friends.
Yeah, just being back in the States and going through my curriculum now, I've noticed how much has come from Australian educators. So what we heard in those conferences was really like cutting edge ideas and research that I'm learning about now, like especially in the areas of literacy and reading. It's amazing that we're kind of working hand in hand with them through our research, and we're adopting their ideas as well as they're adopting our ideas, especially with special ed. So it stuck with me. I'm still experiencing what we heard about in the conference, which means it was a very beneficial experience.
And then for the school experience, we got to go into some more schools in Sydney too and visit some more kids, which was really fun. We also went to a high school there, and that was where I found out I can silence a classroom with my accent. So that was pretty interesting. I don't know if they liked it or not, but it was again the same thing. They were so curious at a totally different city, very far away. They were so interested if we met celebrities, on what we thought of their government and what we thought of their schools. So it was really, really interesting to see kind of that perspective again, and just get a few different looks at how they run their schools and the different types of classes that they offer there.
The other professional development that we got to go to, this was actually a 3-day one, was capitalizing on curiosity. and they do spell capitalizing with an S, so every time I put that in my scrapbook and things, it tells me it's wrong, but it's just another Australian little minute difference. This was a really cool conference because there were one or two, I believe, American speakers that I got to see, which was, again, funny seeing American people talking in Australian conferences. I also got to go to a small section. They kind of broke out and you had different sections that you could choose to go to. And I went to one on running records. And I know Nicole went with me and we kind of talked about how this is something very similar to the United States and kind of just, comparing education systems again. And I thought this was a really interesting one to go to. Another thing that we haven't touched on yet, but it's a very big part of the Australian culture, is morning tea. And even at their professional development conferences, even when we went scuba diving, even when we went kayaking, no matter where we were, no matter what event we were going to, they always had morning tea. And I thought that was something really cool. It's just kind of like a break in the day. Like even when we went to schools, they would have like a morning tea just for us. When we went to some of our placements even, like we had a morning tea while the students were having lunch, and then we had recess later, that was our lunch. And I thought that was just kind of a really cool thing, that they've kind of like, it was a constant throughout the entire trip, which I know we all miss it, so.
Yeah, it's like a brain break for adults. And it was also a very beneficial time for us to walk around and mingle and interact with the educators that were at the conference. I remember Lindsay and I just sipping our tea. We sat next to this woman who struck up a conversation, and we ended up talking with her for a long time. She was a principal at a high school and had a lot of good insights for us. So it was a good time.
And then Canberra is the capital of Australia, so there's a lot of museums and different things like that to do. So we were able to take some of our time and go visit those different places. It was really interesting. We went to I dragged some people with me to the National Library. And one of the exhibits that they had there was about Australians in World War II. And that really opened my eyes to how much we teach history from very much our own standpoint, because that's something that I took how many history classes in elementary school and high school, and I took one here too. And that never is like really brought up, or it never stuck with me, I guess, if it was. So it was really interesting how they had like the same kind of memorials and everything like that we have here. It's just a totally different perspective. And we forget about that when we teach sometimes, that there are so many different perspectives across the world. And to kind of bring that into our classrooms, I think, is a really important thing. And then the final kind of part of our trip here before the conference, we went to schools for a few days. We each got to spend 2 days observing with one teacher or a few teachers. They would let us kind of follow them around. So I think that, do you guys want to start talking about yours? We all went to elementary schools, then we kind of split up. The special ed students got to go see special ed classrooms, and then they got to go see some elementary classrooms.
All right, I was at Gordon Primary School in a 4th grade classroom, and I thought my experience was fantastic. I really loved we were in there for 2 full days, and the students really got to know me really by like the 10th minute I was there, and they were always asking me, why do you talk so funny? And I was kind of, shot back like, I think you talk funny, like different perspectives. So they kind of giggled at that. They're only in 4th grade. They weren't offended by any means, but just that whole experience was fantastic, and something that really stuck with me that my teacher, actually, the first day I was there, he let me lead a whole math station. So they had a bunch of math centers, and I got to sit at one and work on this game with students. And there was a student that was especially troubling. He was kind of a troublemaker, and we don't have any of those in America, but he was especially challenging me. And I understood that I was someone new in his environment, and I was probably messing up his daily schedule, and that it wasn't completely his fault. But the teacher was kind of telling me that he's kind of the troublemaker all the time. And at the end of the day, at the end of the 2 days that I was there, he gave me a big hug and he said, "Thank you for learning with us, Lindsay. I don't want you to go." And as he walked away, the teacher looked at me and he said, "That's unheard of for this student. Like, he's never done things like this before." And I still get the chills thinking about it. It was an incredible experience that I got to be a part of, and I loved it, every second of it.
I agree with Lindsay. I had an amazing experience. I was placed in a 1st grade classroom at Benithin. That's a funny word there. It's we had a hard time pronouncing it for a long time, but it is Benithin. And the 1st grade plan was very interesting, that there was 3 teachers for 3 classes of 1st graders, but there were no walls in the classroom. So it was just a big open room, and each teacher had a little corner to teach their 20 or so kids. And so I was placed with one teacher, and she was a great mentor. Really reminded me of other teachers I've worked with in America, and sort of no-nonsense type of teacher. So especially in 1st grade, that's necessary sometimes. But she welcomed me right into the classroom, and I really got to know the kids being there for the full day, and was so excited to go back for a second day. And I was actually placed with a different first grade teacher for the second day, so I had and she had a different teaching style, so that was even more beneficial to see kind of the differences between the two. My favorite part was going to a hip hop lesson with them. It counted as their physical education for the day, and the whole school, Bonithan was doing a lesson on hip hop dancing. So I spent about an hour and a half learning a dance to Uptown Funk with 7-year-olds. So I get a smile when I think about it still, because it was just such a beautiful, fun experience. Janelle learned it too. Maybe later, yeah. I'll have to refresh my memory, but yeah. So, yeah. Right. So, yeah. I'll let you guys move on.
Yeah, so I also went to Gordon Primary, but I was in a special education classroom. It was a great experience. The kids were awesome, but I would say it was quite different as to what special education programs are here. I would say their definition of severe and multiple disabilities is used a lot more loosely. I was in a pull-out class, and it was kids with learning disabilities, kids who had dyslexia, and then kids with ADHD. So these kids were pulled out of their 5th grade classrooms with their peers to be working on a math lesson that was grade level, and they would be basically sitting with the teacher. I mean, for them, they did think this was full inclusion, they were excited about it. And then the teacher would have a planning period, so these kids would go into a different teacher's math classroom and sit in on the same lesson, but the teacher kind of ignored them. They just sat on their iPads in the back of the classroom. And I kind of went up to them, and I'm like, so what do you guys normally do at this time? And they're like, well, we're not really accounted for anywhere. We just have to be back for 3rd period. And I was like, weren't you guys doing this in the last class? And they're like, yeah, but so it was, for example, one of the lessons we were working on, I don't even know, it was graphing. And the final, they would just put it on a graph, and that would be it, for the adapted curriculum that they were working on in their first period. And then the second period maybe took it one step farther, and the only extra step they were doing was maybe putting, I don't know, a percentage to each part of the pie chart. So it was very, very easy, where they could have been in the same class, and just one slight accommodation could have been made, and they would have been able to sit next to their friends that they have lunch with. So seeing that was a little frustrating, just because you feel bad. You want to have a social experience as part of elementary school. You want to be with your friends. You want to play kickball with them. You want to sit next to them and in class, and that's something that I think they were missing out on, especially at the elementary level. The teachers, though, that I worked with who did have the pull-out class was very hands-on. She really pushed them, and that was something I appreciated. They loved her. They looked up to her and idolized her, which is awesome, especially at 5th grade. You're right at that middle school level. They're trying to push your buttons, but she really had a great hold on her classroom.
Okay, so I was at Charles Condor Primary, and I was with a special education teacher, and she worked as a pull-out basis. So throughout the first day, she just pulled out students, I think it was kindergarten and 1st graders, and then 2nd and 3rd, and then 4th and 5th throughout the whole day. And we would go into the classrooms, and like Lindsay said, the classrooms were, we'll talk about more later, but a lot of the schools in Australia were all outside. So this school was one building, and then you'd walk to another building and walk. So it was split up by kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, so-and-so. So we'd walk and we'd get them, and it was just a classroom with 70 students, but 3 different teachers. And so she would see my teacher, and the students would come, and my teacher had a name for, we would go all the way to far off the school kind of, and it was this building, and I think they called it the Fort. I'm not sure, it was some name like that, but all the students liked it. They were oh, we're going to the Fort, woo. And so we would go there, and we would play games the whole time. And like Megan said, it was different the way they use severe disabilities loosely. The students that came with us had more learning disabilities, and my teacher said one kid had behavioral, he needs to play games and calm down kind of thing, take this time of the day out for that. And so that was interesting. And then on my second day, it was actually different because they were having like a school-wide fundraiser. So it was kind of like a fun fair kind of thing, as we would maybe compare it to. And they would have tickets and stuff. And it was really nice. My teacher gave me like a bunch of tickets. And like the other two girls who aren't here were at the same school as me. And we walked around, and like the little girls like loved us. They were like, "Ooh, come with me!" And it was fun. And another thing that I thought was interesting, which I've never seen here, but when we would go pull out students, like one time, for example, this one student didn't want to come, and he was like, "I want to stay here," and like she couldn't get him to come, and he was like, "Can I bring a friend?" And she was like, yeah, so like then he got to bring like his friend, and then him and his friend got to go play games in the fort. And I asked her, I'm like, "Oh, do they like does this regular, like does his teacher just not care?" And she was like, "Oh no, it's fine, like we make sure it's okay." But it was interesting. I think it happens like pretty frequently because I think he knows he can bring a friend every time. Because why wouldn't you want to hang with your friends and play games? All right.
And then I went to Benithan as well, and I was in a pull-out autism classroom, so it was mostly self-contained. And the kids in that classroom, it was for any age kid, but the kids they had in there were K through 2. So they were all around the same age. We did do a little bit of pushing into some of the classrooms there, but they brought the whole class with them. So if we went into a first grade class, all of the kids would go with. It was one teacher with one aide, and they worked really well together, and that's something that I was really impressed with, was how well the two of them really worked together. They did a lot of the planning together and stuff like that. Again, that kind of inclusion piece was a little bit different than how we do it here. But the nice thing about their classroom was they did a lot of, they called it like planned communication. So they would intentionally not look at the kids or intentionally put something like out of reach, or they had a lot of situations where you were like really encouraging the kids to want to communicate. And that's something I've learned about in some of my classes, but to see it in the action and like so strictly put into action was really impressive to me. And they used picture schedules and like a little bit of like PECS communication, stuff like that we use, but it was really interesting to see how dedicated that teacher was and that assistant was to really like intentionally ignoring the kids until they said good morning, and then being very welcoming to them at that point. So I really liked the way that they did that. I thought it was really interesting. And then along with that classroom as well, the teacher and the aide that she was with, they did a lot of kind of like playtime to work on socialization at that age, which was really nice to see, and kind of an interesting perspective too, is that it wasn't super academic focused. It was very much based on like allowing the students to play together. And the other kind of impressive part was that in Australia, not all of their teachers necessarily have a special ed degree as an undergrad. It's not as common there. They're really working on that and kind of building that up. But a lot of teachers will go back for professional development, or they'll go back and get like their master's or higher education in special ed. So the teacher hadn't like really had a ton of special education training, and so her dedication and her assistant's dedication to learning all this, she went to conferences all the time, was really, really impressive to me. She really cared about her kids. So that was really nice to see too.
Okay, so something really interesting that I saw in the educational system, when I was at Macquarie High School, we got to kind of split up and go observe a few classrooms. So I got to go with one other person, and we went into it looked like a gym class, and that's what I thought it was initially. We played flag rugby as opposed to flag football because they do rugby there. But we got to play flag rugby, and we were kind of talking to the teacher, asking him what kind of class it was, how old they were, and he was explaining to us an HSC, a high school certificate. And this is what Colleen and I actually talked a lot about this. We're very interested in it. It's kind of something we find very interesting to talk about. It's what we kind of compared to more of an associate's degree. So a high school certificate was more of something, I believe I heard, when we were also on the Great Barrier Reef boat, I heard one of the employees talking about how scuba diving was one of his trades. It was kind of his high school certificate. So you can get a high school certificate, an HSC, in a lot of things. And these students were getting it kind of in like sports management, refereeing. And I think this was kind of interesting because, well, what we do is an associate's degree, and it kind of forces students to graduate from high school and then go on to college, as to where this kind of like takes away the fear of college, and they can kind of get this done before they even graduate high school and still get a job once they graduate high school because they have this HSC, which is something that was really interesting. I kind of thought of this as like vocational training in high school.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, jump in whenever. So the setup of their grades was also very different from here. They start kindergarten, which they call Prep-E, is the start of elementary school, primary school, and that goes until 4th grade. We saw a few different structures, but for the most part, it goes till about 4th grade, and there's another school for 5th and 6th grade. And then get this, high school starts in 7th grade, which I wouldn't have been ready for high school in 7th grade. So it kind of forces the kids to mature a little bit quicker and also to know what they want to do with the rest of their lives when they're 12, 13 years old. So that's a little bit of pressure, but so other schools we saw would go from Prep-E to 6th grade and then separate school for 7th through 12th grade. So a few different structures, but for the most part is very, I don't know. Yeah.
And then the other difference that we noticed was that the students got to select where they went to school versus having to go to a school based on where they lived for the most part, which kind of resulted in some really interesting balances. They did have some like selective enrollment schools and stuff like that, but the students were selecting where they wanted to go to school. And the other interesting part was that so in the special education classroom I was in, they had 5 spots for students with autism. If those 5 spots were filled, those children would have to go to a different school. They did say that they would kind of make arrangements to make sure that they weren't going like super far away, but that was what they had kind of allotted for that specific classroom because it was a self-contained classroom. And so it was interesting to hear about kind of how they balanced it. A few of the different schools talked about balancing it with like the school down the street and how they got their students and different things like that. So it was interesting that the way that the students get to choose to go to school is slightly different than most communities around here.
Also, they're private schools, so whether that's a religion-based school or just like a theme-based school, they also get funded by the government. So there's not as much separation of church and state in Australia, so you see like parents will select to send their kid to a public school or to a private school, but either way, their taxes are paying for it, so.
Well, I think we talked a lot about this kind of like throughout the whole thing, but there was a lot of differences within special education. Their inclusion, the accommodations, severe disabilities, and then as she said, the degrees. Students, here's one example. We were at one's a private school actually, and we noticed that there were like a lot of stairs, and we were split off, and it was the special ed majors and then 2 teachers talking to us, and someone asked and was like, how does a student with a wheelchair get around? And the teacher was like, well, we don't have that problem. Like it wasn't like there. And then someone was like, well, what if they break their leg? And they were like, I don't know, we'll think of something. Like they would just like move their classroom for the day or something. But I think that was just like kind of, we were all like shocked, like you don't have like students in wheelchairs, like you. And then I think that's when a lot of us realized that like, and then learned later that more students with more severe or multiple disabilities are in whole separate schools. And like their definition of inclusion is just different like than ours. Like it's just to the extent that the word is used. Anyone want to chime in?
Yeah. And I also think when we say severe disabilities, kind of from what we've learned and like the severe and multiple disabilities, what we have in our head is just so different. Like I'm in a classroom right now that I would consider very high functioning. They push into the general education classroom like 90% of their day, and these kids would be at a separate school. So I think that's kind of something that like really like hit me when I walked into the special ed classroom in Canberra. I was like, this isn't special education. Like I was just like so taken back that kids with even just like the minor disability had to be like bussed off to these secret schools that like we didn't even hear about. Yeah. And then another thing that stood out to me was when we were in Sydney, how they were just like, oh yeah, like special ed's kind of a degree here, but like you don't need to major in it like to be a special ed teacher. But like Nicole said, then you get these very passionate people who are willing to go the extra mile for their student and I think that's something, because I know we were sitting there, and me and Betsy have our 6-year plan. We'll be back there, because they're like, anyone with a special ed degree, like, you get a job out here right away. And we're like, all right.
So if you want to visit.
We're like, note to self. I like get home and I'm like, hey, Mom and Dad, like probably gonna have a job out there soon. And they're like, okay. But so that was just something that was very different. We're here to even apply for a special education job, like you major in special education. Like I can't even imagine, like we're only in phase 1 and I feel like I've learned so much that I couldn't even imagine like going into a classroom. I would just be like so thrown back, and I couldn't give the students the best education I could without this training. So I think you really need to be very passionate and like hardworking out there to do special education.
I think another thing, like what Nicole was saying earlier about how her teacher who didn't have a special ed background and was so interested and tried hard, I think that's something that's like we find different here, like when we are including our students, and like sometimes general ed teachers are like, I don't know, like they didn't get the background. And I think in Australia, a lot of, like my teacher too, like she was very dedicated to her students, like yeah.
And I think the other nice thing about special ed was just kind of seeing the very different approaches to it, because we traveled all throughout the country. So seeing the different approaches to it in different schools and throughout the country, because it's like it is here in the United States, that they have a little bit more say in where they are and like how they get to run things. So it was interesting to see that as well. Okay, so the last part that we're going to kind of touch on here is our photo voice research that we did throughout the trip. So that is, the photo voice project is like taking pictures for research to kind of like catalog our trip and what we learned. So we all focused on different themes. So my theme here, this was outdoor learning, and these are not only my pictures, we all worked in groups for this. So this was outdoor learning, and we kind of focused on different things that were related to the classroom, but also kind of seen outside. So the top left picture, that's a learning circle, and that was at James Cook University, and they used that. It's actually an indigenous tradition, but they used it at the school for different classes as well as their indigenous classes. So it's kind of a place that everyone comes to share different things, and it was typically done outside. The middle picture says it's a quiet area for reflection, so it's just kind of giving them that space to look out the window and really enjoy the nature around them. The picture to the right of that is a tree. One of the schools we went to, they were really careful about like labeling all of the things in the environment, the trees, that's a different type of tree, and all of the plants and stuff like that. The picture on the far right is a new addition to the school, and it was built on grounds, and then I don't remember exactly what was happening, but there were like things that were happening in the school that weren't great things. So they believe that it was because of the indigenous land that was used, that they didn't think it was respected properly. So they did a whole ceremony to respect the land that everything was built on, and so that's the picture of the building there. And one of the things I don't think we mentioned was they were very, very careful about like thanking the indigenous culture and the indigenous people for giving them their land. Before a presentation started, they paid respect to the specific group of people that lived there. So that was a really cool thing. Like every university we went to did that before the presentation started. The bottom picture, the really long panoramic, is an outdoor learning space. It has a TV out there, but it's all outside, and they use that to talk about nature, different things like that. That's where we saw Uncle Rusty, and he kind of took us around and taught us about the plants. The little tiny picture in the middle, that is a picture of the students' interpretation of nature. So like we do here, the winter and the fall and the different colors in those. And then all their backpacks are lined up outside, and they have these cute little sun hats that they wear to protect them from the sun, because they're outside so much and the sun is so strong there.
We thought it was cute, but I heard that
actually, yeah,
don't like it.
yeah, the students don't really like them, but we thought it was really cute.
Okay, so Megan and I actually did technology together in our group, and so these were pictures.
Yeah, so the first one I'm going to talk about is the smart board. Again, while talking about technology, I just want to make it like known that I only know like my small area that I've grown up in. Like I don't have like this huge background of the technology in every different geographic area in the United States. So this is just kind of speaking about like the technology where we saw in Australia and like my background knowledge. But so where I'm from, like I'm from the northern suburbs, Smartboards were like in classrooms, but not a ton, and even if they weren't used. I mean, I probably had, in my high school, probably half the rooms had smartboards and none of my teachers used them. Where we noticed in Australia, I noticed them in almost every classroom I went into, and they were used pretty frequently. Like, kids loved them, and they just seemed to have like a really good background knowledge on how to use them and like all the different strengths and stuff you could use with them. The picture below it is a laptop. Again, these I saw it while growing up as well, and these would just be like carts of laptops that would be rolled into a classroom. You could like rent them from the library. The teachers have to reserve them in advance, and then students would independently work on like a project or something. This is cool because it kind of gives students a little bit of a choice, and we've been talking about this in our class a lot too. Our classes just a little more freedom of how they want to present what they're learning about, or like maybe they would get, this specific one is actually from the Indigenous school, and they kind of got to research their own individual culture and what they wanted to go off. So that made them all like really, really excited to learn about it too, and then they got to do their own research like on their own.
Okay, so the top picture with the computer screen and then the bottom iPad, we saw a lot when we were visiting the schools was a lot of station work with students, and a lot of the times in their station works there would be a station like that where they would have a technological, I don't know if that's a word, I like to use that word though, a technology device, and they would play games on that device. And I remember that top screen one, and I was going up to like the two girls, and I saw them, like they were all sitting, and then the teachers were like, okay, like go to station, and they like ran to that station. And I was like, why did you like want to come here? And they're like, this is the most fun. And like they didn't even like want to talk. They like put in their headphones and like were so engaged in it. Like there were different ones for math and different ones as we've all seen. And then the bottom one, we saw a lot of iPads, and like the students would just get in groups and play iPads. And I remember talking to they were younger kids, like probably second grade, I don't know. But they all knew like the level they were at, like they were all at different levels at these games. And like they knew they had to like do better to get to the next level. And like, I don't know, it was just cool to see how much they enjoyed playing that, doing that game. And then above the iPad was a picture, and I thought this room was really cool because it was a bigger table, so there were like about 6 chairs, but there were 3 computers. And then those computers you could connect to that TV that was up there. So like if one person was talking but like the big group couldn't see it, you just plopped it up there and so forth. And then even around that TV was a whiteboard. So I think like this little area like showed a lot like for collaboration with technology, and it was a very good like resource space. And then the bottom picture next to the iPad was just like a classic place where it was just, we saw these all over no matter where we were, like walking like a table with chairs and the thing, kind of like what we have in the UGL, where you can plug it into the TV and project what you want to talk about. So that was cool. Oh wait, we're not done.
This last, for the sake of time, kind of speed through these. The Elmo in the upper right corner, I think those are great. We saw them in Australia, we see them here. If you don't have enough resources to kind of present something hands-on, I think these are awesome. I know math is a great time to use them for actually like physically like carrying your, switching your 10s into 100s. Maybe you don't have the resources to have blocks for every kid to like tangibly hold them. So I think the Elmo's a great way to kind of present those kind of topics. We actually saw it at a university, but I mean, I think they're useful all over. And then Nicole already touched kind of on the outdoor learning environment.
So for the sake of time, I'll just kind of briefly overview that in classrooms, we saw a beautiful mix of cultures together because Australia has a rich history in Indigenous people, but a lot of the people that live in Australia now, well, I don't know the exact percentage, but a lot of people have immigrated within the past 200 years. So everyone has brought this unique culture with them. European immigration was really big in like the 1800s and early 1900s, but there's been an influx of immigrants from Asian countries now. So you see, well, I saw in schools that children didn't seem to notice their differences, but I really enjoyed how cultures were celebrated and intertwined. And so that's one of my favorite pictures from my first grade classroom was that puzzle where each student decorated a puzzle piece to represent themselves and then how they all fit together. And that kind of just embodied the vibe I got from Australia. And schools in general.
All right, and then I'm not going to explain all these classrooms because there's a lot, but I did kind of see a general trend of classes outside, sitting outside, desks outside. As you can see in a couple of these, there's desks outside, and it's just a normal desk that you would have inside, but they kind of really what's the word? They really loved kind of just being outside, and they loved having the kids outside because even though they're sitting at a desk and doing work, just kind of that fresh air, I think, really helped them. And then another thing that I saw was a lot of group work. Like I know you've seen this, and some even like the other photo voice projects. A lot of these desks and chairs and things can be moved together. They can be spread apart. They can kind of like be interchanged and things. And I think that's something that the schools that we've been to, at least, they really strive to do a lot of that in their classrooms. Yeah, this is the link to our blog, so if you guys want to check out more, maybe specific details of each day. And then does anyone have any questions? Please take Tim Tams. They're a great cookie. I highly recommend.